You're listening to the State of Events podcast, Community for Professionals. Our new series, The Future of Business, takes a deep dive at how business and entrepreneurship have transformed the landscape of the workforce throughout the decades. These innovation experts discuss entrepreneurship, business strategy, and our techies chart the crucial role technology plays for success in today's fiercely competitive marketplace. Listen up, because this is the future of business.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the State of Events. I am Sonia Alcazar Collier, your founder and host of the State of Events podcast, magazine, and all the other stuff we do. I am so excited about this series, The Future of Business. We have been talking to people who lead in business, entrepreneurship, and today we are talking to leaders in the tech industry. Come off mute and say hello to the people.
Hi. How's it going, everyone?
Hey. How's everybody doing?
Doing good. So it kind of looks like everybody's remote. So is this a part of y'all's work? Like no one's in a building these days. No one's in the office. Are we all remote workers?
Yep,
indeed.
Plan to always be.
That's right. Yeah, not going back. That's the plan.
Yep, saving money and saving time.
Indeed.
I love it. So I've been remote since about 2011. So I'm actually over it. I would love to put on a blazer and get a briefcase and walk into a building. But quite frankly, no, it is providing a lot of freedom and flexibility for our family. So I completely understand. And thank you all so much for your time. I know some of you are traveling, and Ramon, you made your way to Vegas, I believe. So you're in Sin City, right?
I just got back. So it was a double flight with a 3-hour layover. It was with 2 kids under 6. So it was a lot. But we're here, so it's good.
Bless your heart. Marques, where you at? Are you in some other country? What continent can we find you on these days?
Yeah, right now, you know what? I'm parked. I'm here in Long Beach, California. I mean, it feels good to be in like kind of located in one spot, but I'm gonna start traveling, and I'm not looking forward to it, but I am looking forward to kind of switching up the scenery a little bit. So yeah, right now I'm here in California.
That's awesome. And Jennifer, where can we find you these days? Are you planted for a couple of months?
Oh no, I mean I say I'm planted for the day. Today I'm in LA, specifically Thousand Oaks, which is right over the hill from Malibu. But yeah, I've been in 7 states so far this year, 1 country so far this year. So it just, it's the name of the game. Unfortunately now, good and bad. I mean, since COVID, everyone was at home, during COVID. Then I think in the last year, everyone's gotten really event happy. And that's why I say, like, everyone wants to meet at events, which is great. No one wants to meet in an office, right? They don't want to deal with that, but they'd love to meet at an event. A lot of events happening right now. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
That's great. Well, that provides all of us to be able to, catch some historical landmarks depending on where you are, and hopefully get out of conference mode a few times while you're traveling. So, but that's great. Thank you again for fitting your time in here and talking to our audience, who, quite frankly, is filled with entrepreneurs, business owners, small business owners, just people who are really either have been doing this for some time, or who are actually new to the space, who decided to leave their corporate job, or, maybe working for the state or the city, and are like, I want to do this on my own. And so I think one thing that really kind of inspired this whole series is that I was finding that on teams, there's so many different elements to working on teams these days. You have the difference in generations, which is a whole series, a whole episode that we're doing. We're doing a generations episode. And in this episode, talking about the tech industry, there are so many different things evolving and emerging from the tech space. And it informs us and impacts us greatly as entrepreneurs and business owners. I was just having a conversation the other day about how the consultant space is really changing. And quite frankly, there's some things that are putting us out of work. And so we want to know what that is. And I think that all 3 of you working in the spaces that you work can really inform us how we can keep up with all the changes, which is a huge thing right now, because as soon as you learn something, it changes and evolves to something else. But also to really understand the components of the different areas that you work in and how to apply them instead of trying to figure out how to fight against these things. Why don't we learn how to integrate them in what we're doing so that we can actually feel empowered to do our work? And so, Jennifer, I want to start off with you a little bit. So you are heavy in the AI space. Tell our friends and our listeners what you do in AI, and then actually how you even got into this.
Yeah, well, it's always, thank you for having me here today, Sonia. And it's great to be here amongst some brilliant minds. I always feel humbled because I never saw myself in AI, so it's quite a fun journey. My company that I run right now is called Narrativa, and we are an AI automation company. Particularly, we automate every kind of content, written content in particular, from reports like for clinical trials to written content for Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones. So we do long tail, short tail articles, primarily using NLG, NLP capabilities, and then even query and insights. But enough on the technical side there, we'll get into more later. But yeah, my background actually, surprisingly, is in entertainment and tech. I came to Los Angeles almost 15 years ago, working in entertainment, worked with quite a few of the studios, both in production and then corporate side, and then started consulting for large technology companies in the Silicon Valley, and just found myself loving tech more and more. And then I just love marrying tech and content together. So that's where I am now. And it's been a fun, wild journey. Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's important for our listeners to know, in fact, all of you are going to kind of get to explain this sort of transition from maybe the career that you thought you were going to have or the direction you thought you were going to go in, and now being in what you're doing now. But what was the biggest reason why you decided to sort of leave your career how you knew it and come over to the AI space? That's a big jump, right? Especially because AI hasn't been where it is now for forever. It hasn't really been a thing, if you will, until maybe about the last 10 years. And so why did you decide to come specifically to this space? What attracted you about it?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, it's interesting. I've always been very tech, had a love for tech. I always had this kind of fascination with technology ever since I was a kid. I was the one that my whole family asked to rewire computers and rewire back ends of TVs and televisions. But I love television, but yet I was finding a lot of things were getting very shaky in the entertainment industry, in which they are now even more. And I was working with companies like Hulu when they first started, and I loved how they were bringing together both technology and content to create a whole new user experience as an OTT platform. But I never saw great potential for growth in entertainment. I saw that, yes, on the creative side, you can always, make another film or another show or do more creative, but there was just a lot of, repeats in entertainment. And so I wanted to go towards something that was just brand new and really could help more people. And I was kind of just going through the motions in entertainment, where I asked myself, what am I doing to really help change not just companies and industries, but actually change lives? Like, what am I doing? And I don't know, maybe it's because I hit my 40s and I was like, what am I going, what's my legacy going to be? And so I actually, about 6 years ago, I started talking with some folks who had started an AI company over in Spain by the name of Narrativa. And then they'd started in 2015. And then I came on board in 2019. And I was fascinated with the idea of helping to automate large portions of data entry or analysis to actually not only give employees more time back, right, in their day, so they can go walk their dog, they can pick up their kids from school, but actually to help save more lives, like in clinical trials, help the clinical trial process to shrink and go faster so we can get more medicines and cures to patients. So that's what was really my driving factor, was this kind of aha fork in the road where I said, I've got to do something that's going to last longer than me.
So let's talk a little bit about that then. What specifically in the AI can do so much and can go so many different places? What specifically do you do in the AI space? What kinds of things do you work with? I heard you mention medicine. Can you explain a little bit about what the specifics of your job is?
Yeah, so we actually built out a proprietary AI software. This was first from the large and small models, AI models, BERT, GPT-2, and then GPT-3. We've used Chat GPT. It's been around for a while. People just now know about it in the last year, but it's been around for a while. But the problem was we were servicing large finance companies and pharmaceutical companies. And many of the newer AI models are open models. And so you can't use those when you have PII, personal identifiable information, because there could be, of course, a breach, right, in data security. And so what you want to do is what we did, we took portions of these different models and built our own. So that we had our own proprietary software that was fully secured on the Azure cloud, making sure that there was no security risk for our clients. And so now our use cases we first started in media and gaming. From 2015 till 2019, we were servicing large clients like Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones, Financial Times, InfoBuy, and other gaming companies, primarily providing articles. So we literally would take, for example, like with Wall Street Journal, Dow Jones, we take the stock market index and it's a daily RSS data feed that then we filter into our software, and we generate an entire news article of the stock index in seconds. And so we actually allow the Wall Street Journal journalists to have at least 80% to 100% of the article done for them. And then all they have to do is be a copy editor and go in, and they can finesse it. They can add, a quote from the president or whoever. And then they don't have to do all the grunt work. It's automated for them. And then they just put their name on it and they can publish it. So the average journalist could maybe write 2-3 articles a day. Now they can publish hundreds of articles a day. And so that's what we were doing for a while. And so now the same thing goes in pharma. We're doing internal reporting that has to go to the FDA or the EMA for clinical trials with all of the narratives and all the reports of what happened in the drug trials.
Wow, that's incredible. I love how you, especially for our entrepreneurs, I love how you just showed us the way, or one of the ways that, their time is cut down so they can get more done. Efficiency seems to obviously be, the capabilities seem to be endless with efficiency, and then being able to get on more. So I'm going to save this for later, because I would love to hear all of us chime into this whole thing about writing content and, producing copywritten things, especially those of us and almost all of us, maybe with the exception of Marques, have had some experience as actor, producer, been in the Hollywood space. And I would love to even kind of go a little bit further with that on how you feel with the writing component. But before we go there, can you tell our small businesses, our entrepreneurs, our creatives, what are some of the resources outside of obviously the efficiency that you just mentioned? What are some other resources that AI can provide for the small business owner or the entrepreneur?
Yeah, some of the resources or benefits that AI provides is, number one, most companies don't realize they're sitting on mountains of data, and that data is gold. People don't look at it that way, but the more information that you have and the more data you have, the more effective you can be in your marketing. So you can actually, use keywords or to help, like what you would with SEO. We can do that with articles. We can write whole articles or marketing pieces. We've even generated automated video and even marketing banners and ads, all generated based on what your data says. So what's your data telling you about your audience, and who do you need to be marketing to? So we also service quite a few marketing companies and agencies. And that's where I would say use the data that you have at hand, whether you're using Power BI, Tableau, or any other Salesforce. Use that data and repurpose it in other ways. You'd be amazed how much AI can use to generate content, reusable content, because every client, whether they're small, medium, or large companies, they actually need constant, updated, evergreen content to promote their business, right? And their services. So use it to your advantage. Use that data and use AI to help you with the grunt work to actually generate the content. And then you can go in and finesse it, have it do all the hard work for you and go in and finesse it yourself, or have your teams work on it. So that's what I would say. Use it for email blasts, white papers, whatever it may be.
That's incredible, especially if you do have to get some deliverables out in in masse.
Yeah.
That
I'll
really,
share one
that
example.
Really
Like, this is funny, Sonia, but I'll share one example. Okay. I do a lot of presentations now at different conferences. Well, I wanted to have a fresh take on a new presentation that I'm presenting in San Francisco the first week of June coming up. So I just went in and I was having fun with Chat GPT, and I put in a question of, what are the benefits and what's the pros and cons of integrating artificial intelligence into clinical trial regulatory documentation? I gave it a whole sentence, a whole question, and tell me in a 10-minute speech. And it literally wrote out this whole speech for me, a 10-minute speech. And it was kind of fun because yes, of course, I'm not going to use that word for word, but it gave me a lot of fresh ideas. It kind of was someone I could just bounce off, ideas off of, and have a new perspective on what I should say.
Thank you for that. That's wow. That really has my mind going, and it's a great segue as well for us to move into talking a little bit more in depth about ChatGPT. Marques, I want to bring you to the stage to kind of get in here. I know that you bring a wealth of knowledge not only to AI, but obviously in all of the work that you do with being this cyborg anthropologist. So please, first, I know that the audience is going to need to know this. What does it mean to be a cyborg anthropologist?
Hey, everyone. Really excited to be here. Thank you for putting this together. I think it's more important to have these conversations more than ever. So cyborg anthropology is really, kind of at its lowest level, the practice of studying the interconnections between humans and technology. And I think these intricate relationships between humans and technology have been going on for millennia. Like, ever since we discovered fire, there's been, this juxtaposition or this dance with technology that has helped us evolve. And I think it helps us to understand how technology is transforming us as individuals, but also our society and our cultures and our identities. And I think it really encourages us to reflect on the implications that these changes kind of increasingly have in this technocentric world. And so it's an interdisciplinary field that really takes a deep dive into the relationships. And I think relationships are really important because during those relationships, it's hard to understand what those boundaries are. And so cyborg anthropology really leans on this more quantum understanding that two things can be true at the same time, right? A particle could be a wave as well as a particle at the same time, right? Or electron. And so when we start to look and break down and create discourse around those interconnections, we really start to see that there is no boundaries between us and it. As we are creating technology, technology is creating us. So I really just try to look at ethnographic background on what are those relationships, how do they combine with society, how do they influence culture, and what is actually new and next for society.
Wow, and to hear you talk about that, just it begs the question: what is it that makes it anthropological, you know how to say this word, but is it true, the trueness of going back? Like, how are we accessing what was to create where we're going? Like, there's some having to go back aspects of especially with the work that you do, and what are we doing when we go back and seeing what has happened, where we've come from, and then where are we going? Like, what is that connection that's being made for us?
Yeah, that's such a good critical question. So I had the opportunity when I was making the transition from my last career, being a professional athlete in the NFL. I started to travel. Like, I was really keen on understanding how other cultures, how other languages, how other geographical locations were combining with creating their own communities. And I think what happens far too often is that we think that the world is kind of our bubble, right? And when you start to travel, what happens is that bubble starts to expand, but it also starts to condense. So it shows you all of the things that are different, but it shows you also all of the things that are similar when it comes to humans. So taking an ethnographic approach, I've had fortunate enough to travel to about 83 countries and working in about 21 of those countries, really diving into how these local communities relate to technology. From the Kogi tribe in Colombia, where they would actually put their shamans in total darkness, where light deprivation would actually increase the serotonin, where it would go up into the frontal lobe and then dissolve, and then they would have these epiphanies, right? Almost like these near-death experiences. That is also a form of technology. Or when you're working with someone in the DR Congo, where they're using plant medicine to actually cure illnesses, that is also forms of technology. And then when you start to combine that with modern technology, then you have some interesting insights of what has happened, combining it with modern technology and seeing what's possible for the future.
So you kind of slipped that in there where your career was. That is a big change. Yeah, I'm just a successful football player for all of these people. Why did you decide to leave the NFL to come over to this space? And when answering this, the reason why this is important and why I wanted you to come here is because there are so many people in the 3 years that we've been building this platform. There's so many people that are having career changes. Particularly, I think since 2020, it's actually allowed people to think about having a career change. Like, maybe they weren't able to thrive where they were, and it was like, what's next? And post 2020, it's like, although there were obviously there's some demise with what happened with the pandemic, it really has opened up our eyes to being able to see what is possible. And so why would you leave primarily a successful career for something that obviously the tech world is successful, but why would you leave not having any background in it to this capacity?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think about this all the time. And I think it was one of the best decisions that I ever made for myself personally, but also for my career. When I was 19, I was at UCLA. I had the opportunity to go to Africa. At first, I was like, you know what? I don't want to go to Africa. All of the images, that I've seen growing up, were really disparate. And it really kind of was discouraging. I didn't want to see it face to face, right? But through parents and kind of tutors and mentors, they were like, you know what, go, like, explore, experience the world. Like, you have this great opportunity, go do it. And I remember this like it was yesterday. When I got off the plane, like, I saw the largest sun that I had ever seen in my life. And the smells actually smelled so familiar that I was like, wow, the world is such a big place, but it's also such a small place. And then while I was driving to the hotel, I'm looking, and it literally, the infrastructure looked like it hadn't been touched in 40 years. And I look to my right and I see two gentlemen just holding hands, smiling. And that is something in me just actually clicked, right? That all of the things that I grew up to amount to success, or to amount to something that was great, or something that you should strive for, was really nothing in comparison to actually being happy, to actually, following your dreams and being who you are. And so as I, played football, I always wanted to remind myself that, and I think this happens for a lot of entrepreneurs or a lot of people in business, sometimes far too often we're good at something and we begin to identify with that. And a lot of times we forget that's what we do and not necessarily who we are. And so what I was really searching for was, how do I align with who I am with what I do? And also, I wanted to have impact. I've always been a curious person, and I wanted to be a part of writing a piece of that narrative of the future. And ultimately, I really wanted to be at the edge of building the future. So I felt like that transition was necessary for me to only fulfill my personal goals, but also I wanted to be part of the world, not just in the world, if that makes sense.
It's pretty powerful to be able to see that, especially if you're seeing that at a young age. There's not necessarily something that becomes a piece of wisdom or knowledge until you've lived a little. So to have that experience so young is incredible. When you think about your transition over to the tech space, what have you, outside of obviously what Jennifer has been talking about with the AI technology to write and to help us be more efficient with our business and growing and scaling? What are some of the things that you do with in the chat GPT space that you have noticed is a huge benefit for small businesses and entrepreneurs?
Yeah, I think ChatGPT is fairly new to a lot of the kind of general public, but I think there's a lot of understanding that needs to continue to build in understanding what ChatGPT really is, right? And I think ChatGPT is really like having a conversation with a highly intelligent computer program. And I think it was designed to really understand and respond to questions, or what they call prompts, just like a human. Just like we're having a conversation, we can have a conversation and use language. And I think what ChatGPT allows us to do is consolidate and almost create this hive mind of all of the knowledge that has been generated in articles and books, and even like movies, scripts, anywhere there's grammar or websites or written materials. ChatGPT allows us to really digest this massive amount of text and massive amount of information, where we can actually have a conversation, right? Or we can ask it a question, we can ask it a statement. And I think these models, what they call large language models, they give a response based on what is learned. So as you continue to talk with it and interact with it, then ultimately you have an opportunity to create more nuanced conversations, more entailed and detailed conversations. And so the way that we've been utilizing it, right now, I'm actually standing up a venture studio, and one of our first projects is looking at the nuances and divergence of language. So the semantic shifts on how people understand, digest, but then also utilize language. And I think, far too often, once again, how I perceive a word will be bounced off a lot of my references and who I am individually. And sometimes there's a agreed understanding of what that word means, but a lot of times there's a lot of divergence in really fully understanding and how I actually perceive that word. So what we're using is these different patterns in ChatGPT and large language models to really understand where there's divergence and where there's nuances, where there's similarities, but then also where there's differences in understanding of language.
I don't want to give too much of a spoiler alert in case you do these workshops and use a lot of these examples that you did when you came to UCLA, where we met. Marques and I were able to, we curated a panel for our parents at the UCLA Lab School, and Marques came and talk about AI to our parents. And obviously we're going to get into social responsibility, but that was a lot from our parents' perspective, is they wanted to know, how do I protect my kids? What are they learning? How do I need to empower them to be able to interact with this technology? But most importantly, to protect them from maybe some of the pitfalls and downfalls of this technology. And so before we move on, I do want to ask the question, as you continue to develop and as ChatGPT develops, we had this exercise that you took us through. Could you explain a little bit about the purpose of that exercise that you do? It was so beautiful to use inanimate objects that in and of themselves maybe had meaning, but for us, they were inanimate objects, and we built these beautiful stories. What was that exercise that you took us through, and why did we do that?
Yeah, so, something that I really kind of realized maybe about 6 or 7 years ago is that language is almost like the coding material for our reality. And I think, as humans, we have this very unique experience in being able to envision and to dream and to really see outside of what's here in the material world to what possibly can be. And so, what I like to do, and what some of my engagement to a lot of the communities around the world of what I actually would do, is create these wooden chips that had different icons that were generally understood, like a cloud or a boat or a stop sign or a piece of candy, something that represented that was also universally understood. And what I would have individuals do was write out their narrative, kind of what is their dream state, what is their dream narrative and way of actually being here on this planet. And what I do is once they wrote it out, create these chips and create this lineage of story, right, through these chips. And then after that, what we would do is actually have these little monsters, right? And what we would call those is blockers. And so we would have them place physically so they could see where those actual blockers were within their narrative. And then to kind of sum that workshop up, what we would do is actually see what they could do, one thing that they could do every day to alleviate that blocker to create the ideal state that they wanted to be in. And so, combine that now with something like ChatGPT, we can take these envisioned dreams and start to come up with very tangible ways of getting to that dream. And I think what the future looks like, and I think the successful individuals, entrepreneurs, are going to be the ones that are going to be able to build unique experiences for their customers and for their users. What is my narrative? Once I understand what that narrative is, how do I actually create that feeling or that emotion or that experience in a bespoke way that can ultimately satisfy those different urges? Of course, there's a lot of social responsibility that goes with that, where we have access to all these things. But I think if we are considerate with that in the development of the software and the hardware, then we can definitely live some very robust and abundant lives.
Right. Yeah. It's like I get to control the narrative of my story, which is as creatives, as entrepreneurs, and just as humans, like we don't want to lose that ability to be able to tell our story. And thank you for that, Marques. And to move us into storytelling, I have what I would consider, I'm biased though, because he is my hermano from another mother, but I think we have one of the best storytellers on today's panel. My friend, my brother, my colleague, my husband's bestie, Mr. Ramon Govea. Welcome to the State of Events podcast. I'm so glad that you made it today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here among such brilliant minds. Honestly, I'm just I'm finding myself nodding throughout all the answers. It's cool.
I love it. I love it. So I know that I'm going to have some DMs before we even get into a lot of what you do. I'm going to have some DMs of why on our graphic do we have a picture, or if they don't know, a cartoon? Like, what is an NFT? What is your profile picture? Please tell us what that is about.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and that's kind of the reason that I do it. I do it for two reasons: using that as my, profile picture, or what people are beginning to call, social identity. A non-fungible token is essentially, and I apologize for the noise back there. I do have two kids, as you pointed out, so you may pick them up a little bit. But it's a non-fungible token. So what that essentially means is that it's you can think of it like a digital certification for something that is one of a kind and cannot be replaced. So the best way to think about that, I think, just in normal layman's terms, is something like a unique collectible, a signed one-of-a-kind book, or could be something as unique as like a deed to a specific house or property. It could be real estate, right? And that could be something that applies to anything from PDF to a video to a picture of an ape, right? And so there's a bunch of different use cases. The way to kind of take it a step further is that it's kind of like a storefront, a digital storefront, because there's a value proposition that comes with each of these non-fungible tokens, right? There's a certain value that people can attach to it. There, for example, in the case of my profile picture, that's one of the biggest NFT projects to come out of the space. That's something that they did was they gave out the commercial rights, the license to use it for merchandise and for basically being able to do whatever you want with that picture, whether it be using it on a coffee mug or a T-shirt or whatever, right? So, there's a utility that comes with that. It's a membership. There are a lot of, really prominent figures that own NFTs, specifically these Bored Apes. It's the Bored Ape Yacht Club, right? But not all NFTs are created equal, right? Just like you can find a Picasso or you can find, one of a kind piece of art that your kid drew that maybe is only valuable to you and your family, right? So I think that's probably the gist of it, right? In terms of explaining what it is, how it works, and why it even matters, and how it's going to kind of reshape how we really authenticate, I think, information in the future utilizing, what's called blockchain technology.
There's such a connection to what each of you do and how one thing sort of informs the next, which informs the next and circles back around. So I love how I'm seeing this energy go. Ramon, can you tell everyone what you do specifically and where you've come from? Again, we have another person who's left one industry to go to another. So tell our audience a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, sure. So my background ultimately is in entertainment as a whole. I had the opportunity to, after college, move to LA. I went to school at the University of Maryland for a few years. I was a TA there teaching film and arts. And naturally, I wanted to go into film and television and write for various different media. And so I went into what was called, a few years later, it was dubbed by a teacher at USC, Transmedia storytelling, which is essentially being able to tell your story across multiple platforms. And so that whether that be film or video games or comic books or animation, right? I wanted to essentially tell these broader, epic stories across all of those different platforms. And so when I moved to LA, it was really just broadly to be a writer. And over the years, I had the opportunity to, work for various companies. I got the opportunity to work with Stan Lee, producing content for his YouTube channel. Went on to work for Scopely in their marketing department, doing work for them on their Walking Dead Road to Survival game. So it was really kind of like adopting a lot of the fictional lore aspects, making sure I was familiar with who the characters were and all that stuff, and then translating that into something that could actually bring back some kind of ROI, right? Looking at KPI and numbers and data and analytics, right? Understanding all of that. At the same time, I was, doing my own side hustles. So, I was waiting tables until, I could basically finance my own company. At that point, I was actually partnered with your husband, Brett, back in the early days. We were producing content together. So, from there, learning digital marketing became essential. And that was really sort of what led me to understand the importance of content creation in this formula of, being able to gather this data and analytics and being able to grow a brand, in some sort of authentic, meaningful way, right? A lot of it is through content marketing. And eventually this idea of marketing and content kind of have blended together and, the evolution of product placement into product integration, all of that, like you said, it all fits together. So I don't really see myself as switching careers. After leaving Scopely, I went on to work for Baron Davis. And basically I was managing a lot of his entertainment properties. So everything from development all the way through to trying to find distribution, developing merch, overseeing the manufacturing of that merch and getting that to stores, all of that stuff. So basically brand management as a whole. I did that for a few years for the Black Santa brand. And from there, I was able to really just build my own company. And that's when I started Myth Division. I had already been building out the IP using crowdfunding. So the idea of using blockchain as this direct to consumer tool, being able to gather the data, the analytics, understanding who's buying from you directly without having to worry about third parties, I think is really sort of the allure of this technology. So I still do the same thing. We produce content. I produce animation, comic books. I'm working on some live action stuff in development right now with some major players in the studios. But I'm just shifting my focus more towards the use of blockchain technology in order to keep track of it and to really, I'd say, this word is a little overused these days, democratize, but essentially to be able to, provide the tools for more people to have access that maybe I wish I had back, in the old days, with your husband when we were struggling artists, right? So that's really ultimately what I'm doing now.
It's fascinating how it seems like it wasn't until I heard you speak that I'm really seeing that you all three of you have actually responded to the change that's happening, been a part of the change that's happening. And it really is, I think one of you might have mentioned maybe in a pre-interview or in a discussion that we've had before, like chicken or the egg thing going on here. Like what is happening? Is it we're changing, and so then the technology is changing and responding to us? Or if humans are the ones who are creating this technology, are we changing and then we're informing it? Like it's such a, like who knows, right? And what you just described, Ramon, it is truly that. In the past, I don't know, maybe 15 years or so that I've known you, you've really evolved with it, and it's evolved with you at the same time. And so that's incredible to see how that's happened, and how, quite frankly, how all of you have been able to monetize off of this. And that's important, right? Because we want the work that we do, of course, to have a social implication. We want it to do good in theory. But we also need it to be able to provide for us and our families. And so it's great to see that that's all has happened for you all. When we talk about metaverse, Web3, some people are very new to this. And so, Ramon, can you just give us some layman terms of like, what is the metaverse? What is Web3? And obviously you described what NFTs are, but and then what is multi-platform or transmedia, multi-platform storytelling? Like, what are these little terms? What would be a layman's equal or equivalent to these terms that you're dishing out here?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think the easiest way to think of the metaverse essentially is how we think of the universe, right? We think of the universe and ourselves within it, within the the solar system, the galaxy, and all that. The metaverse is essentially the virtual or digital version of that. So you may hear people go on the news, or people think about how do we define the metaverse. I think it's one of those things where it's just a pervasive virtual sort of universe within itself, where everyone can build their own experiences within it, right? So I think it's as broad as that, and that's probably the easiest way to look at what the metaverse is. Just like we have, video games and video game worlds, they're just all, I think, going to be much more easily connected or interoperable, as the term is. That's just something that's really important in terms of what builders are thinking when developing and shaping the architecture of the metaverse, right? How are we all going to interact in there, and how's my favorite collectible or digital asset going to also pop up in somebody else's experience? And it's as simple as, how can I take my favorite, Star Trek character, for example, and utilize that in a Star Wars game? And I think that's what the next sort of level is going to be when we talk about the metaverse. But we're not there yet, right? We're still in that building phase. I'd say we're still in sort of what's called Web 2.5 or 2.4 or something like that, where the infrastructure and the architecture really isn't there, and the mass adoption really isn't there yet, right? It's a very small space. Like the two other guests who've been in AI for a long time understand, a lot of this technology has been developed over the last few years, but it's barely starting to pick up steam and momentum and utilization in more of a commercial respect, right? And so it's just an evolution of technology. I love that that Marcus was talking about that earlier. It's that this idea of our biological functions as technology, I think, is an important thing to think about, because the way we utilize these extra technologies that are not biological, they're still within our ecosystem. So it's just a matter of sort of zooming out and zooming into the sort of micro or macro ecosystem, right? And so that's how I look at the metaverse. That's how I look at storytelling as a whole, really, ultimately. That's what multi-platform storytelling is, right? It's the Marvel Cinematic Universe. It's being able to play Spider-Man on your Nintendo Switch and then go watch it in the movie theater and have an equally emotional or cathartic experience because you have a connection with this character, and not just the character but all the characters within that universe, right? And so multi-platform storytelling is something that's relatively new because of the nature of technology. Technology is always evolving, and so by nature new platforms are always popping up, and so it's just a matter of like you alluded to, trying to keep up, from my perspective, and making sure that I understand where trends are going. And, luckily I've had my finger on the pulse pretty consistently just because of my love of technology. My dad was in the Army, and he was a CTO and a CIO for several companies and government organizations. So I got exposed to computers very early. I've been able to kind of witness the evolution of how we change as computers change and enable us to do different things. So I'd say that's really all it comes down to, is just sort of our experience of it. But it's pretty broad, evolving space ultimately.
I want to talk a little bit about, and this is sort of open to everyone. I do want to start with you, Ramon, on this. How have you noticed entrepreneurs or business owners are lagging behind in keeping up? Is it because fear, not knowing how to interact with technology, especially to this capacity? Is it, do you think that there are financial roadblocks? I've just noticed that even, again, just in implementing ChatGPT as an entrepreneur in the past couple of months, this has truly been like, where has it been? If I would have had, like you said, if I would have had this 10 years ago, man, the time that I would have saved. So where are we lagging as entrepreneurs and as business owners of really being able to keep up? Is it fear, or is it just lack of knowledge? What do you think that is?
That is a very good question. Having been through, again, 15 years of Hollywood, as a waiter, at restaurants, as, doing all kinds of different jobs just to make ends meet while I'm building a company that can sort of sustain things. I got to know a lot of entrepreneurs and business people who, not just successful ones, but unsuccessful ones, right? And I think it just comes down to willingness to take that risk, to really jump into the space and try and understand it, as opposed to remaining passive and waiting for analysis from the talking heads on TV. Maybe, I don't know. I think that could be a big part of it. It might be fear for some people. It may be skepticism for others. But I think with AI in particular, there probably is a lot of fear that's been put into sort of the general consciousness, specifically from obviously film and television. I'm sure there's a variety of reasons, and I'm sure there's a ton more conspiracy theories, but it's pretty crazy, right? How much fear there is around AI. And I'm sure, the two of you could probably speak more to it than I could, but just understanding that it's more of a tool and it's less, I think, as, there's a lot of opportunity here, I'll say, in the time that we're in, to be able to shape how these tools are used. And so I think that's just a big important factor in all of it. When it comes to how do we, really utilize all of this stuff for good reason. But in terms of business owners and being willing to actually, I think, dive in with it, I think it's just a matter of, you got to ask questions and you have to, have access to the information. So it's very early in the space. And I think there's opportunity for content creators to be there on the front lines, taking notes and, writing down all the milestones and what's going on. That's how we're all sort of spreading this information on social media anyway. But
yeah. Jennifer, Marques, please chime into that.
Yeah, I was going to say, the biggest thing is it comes down to is how applicable is this in real life? I always say to myself, I say to our team, like, it's great. You can have, something that, is a cannonball that creates rainbows or whatever. That's awesome. But how is this going to help me in my real life? And so I think it just, and sometimes, I'm a little passionate about it. So sometimes I feel like a mom, cause I'm like, is this real? Like, like I kind of get on their case because I'm like, this is great, but can we scale with this product? Like, how many people really are going to use this in their everyday life? And that's what you think. I mean, looking back at AI has been around since 1951. I mean, it's since World War II. This is not, it's not new. It's just the application's new. Okay. So let's take it a little bit farther. Let's say NFTs. It's the modern baseball card. Okay. Right. So, I mean, so really you have to think of it in a way like, okay, yes, the chicken egg concept, like we're constantly evolving and it's evolving with us. I always say people don't change until they hurt bad enough. So they're going to, Ramon, I love what you said about like, exactly. People are not going to change and grasp onto these new technologies until it hurts bad enough. And I hate to say that, but that's usually how it goes.
Sure.
I talk with huge pharma sponsors every single day from 5 a.m. till 6 at night. I'm on phone calls all day. And literally they are still resistant. And it's May 18th, 2023. They're still resistant to automation. And I'm like, were you not on this planet with us during COVID? Like, did you not see how many people were dying and needing, whether it was a new vaccine or a new medicine, or how many people are dying of cancer right now? I mean, are you like in the same world as me? And so it's just hard because they're so used to their same pattern. We are creatures of habit.
Yes.
We are designed that way. And so we have to really kind of jolt ourselves out of that. And some of us are more open to it than others. So I would say, number one, we've got to show them real life application. Okay, how's this going to help you? Number two, we have to, I feel like I almost lose my breath every day reminding huge teams, 200 medical writers a day I talk to saying, listen, I'm not here to take your job. I'm here to help you. I want you to save time. You're going to keep your job, but it's going to evolve. Look at the .com era. It was the same thing in the 90s. I remember the .com era. Everyone was freaking out because they're like, this is going to take our jobs, and all these online retailers.
And it did exactly the opposite.
It did the opposite. It created more jobs, but they were different jobs.
That's right.
So instead of me being a normal, as I would compare, this is a very everyday life experience. Instead of me being a normal teacher, a professor in a classroom, guess what my new teaching experience is going to look like? It's going to look like this. I'm going to be on Zoom, or I'm going to be on Blackboard. It's like you just have to keep evolving. And unfortunately, there are those few who won't evolve. They will not change. And I hate to say it, they'll be left behind.
4 to 6%. I think there's always like, whenever there's any huge, movement or change, there's always, they say 4 to 6% that will never, ever, embrace the innovation, whatever it is. So it's interesting.
Yeah. Marques, I know, I want to.
And if Marques, if you can include this in your answer, if it applies from your vantage point, and being so well-traveled and really getting into like the trenches with the locals, there has to be some element of like, not everyone's going to buy into this. And that has to be okay. But are these communities that you're experiencing, are they truly going to be left behind, or are they developing? I mean, I'm sorry, but when you go to some of these countries, you're like, oh, y'all are killing it. You're going to be all right.
Yeah, and I think, just to kind of touch on the point of the last question, sometimes change is very difficult, especially when it comes to humans. Like, we are habitual people, as Jennifer explained, but then also there's rituals, right, behind what has kept communities together for millennia, right? And sometimes those are very, very delicate, and sometimes too much change can actually cause collapse. And so what happens is that, when there's these new technologies or these new forms of technology, sometimes it's like learning a whole new language. And what that actually entails is having to go back and actually de-educate yourself on all of the things that you've learned, and actually to make room for new things that are actually coming up. And I think, there's a very interesting thing that I've seen, in communities around the world, where there's a technology, and I think this song and dance between technology and humans has always been there, from ancient civilizations to the Renaissance, you know, to the Industrial Revolution. People have always been like, technology is going to take our jobs. You know, technology is going to change everything. It's something to be fearful of. And I think what happens is that there's nothing in the human DNA that says that we all have to actually evolve the same. Right. And so with that, there are communities that are leaning in on more of the technology of the earth. Right. When we think about a laboratory, right, what better laboratory do we have than 4.5 billion years of iteration to get things right, to create the perfect conditions for humans to actually have this experience? That's the technology in itself. And some people are going to lean more into that, the indigenous ways. They're going to have their hands in their soil, in the soil. And then there's going to be some that are shooting for Mars, right? That are going to be augmenting their realities through sight and consumption, through the way that they feel, and even their human biological augmentation. And so there's a bifurcation that I see that are coming through the human species. Neither one of them is greater than the other. It's just they're different. Right. Some people are going to lean into the more earth technologies that have been holding us. You know, we talk about building these spaceships and Falcon 9, which is great. But what other more beautiful spaceship do we have than the planet, than the earth? That's our spaceship, right? It's going around the sun, you know, without any operator that we know of right now, right? So it's well about perspective, but then it's also, I think that's where some of the biases and the diversity and equity and inclusion has to come in, right? There's this really good paper called Indigenous AI and Indigenous Protocol in AI, where they did a workshop in Hawaii where they looked at all of the different local communities and how they would go about building software and hardware. And what they came up with is that the same considerations that they would actually consider to create a sweat lodge or a ritual would be the same things that they would take into creating a actual hardware or a software when it comes to AI. And so when we're looking at these things, it's all about consideration, right? And whose voice is at the table when these things are actually being created. And I think there's no right or wrong. It's just an evolution. And I think there's going to be a bifurcation of the human species, and it could be fractaled out into multiple different ways of understanding and meaning.
That's great. And it even leads me to a question from your website that I would really love to unpack for a moment, which is going to lead to our DEI component. And I have a lot to kind of comb through. We'll make it quick. But Marques, you posed a great question on your website, and it says, how might we develop and create decentralized communities while transforming humans, ecology, and consciousness? Can you tell us a little bit about what that question means and how do we answer that?
Yeah, I think that's a dance that we all have to kind of consider. So I'm a global luminary for EY, and the first question that I actually ask in front of like global leadership of Fortune 100 companies is, what type of ancestor do you want to be? And I think through that question, it really kind of shocks them because it asks them to consolidate their legacy into the decisions that they're making on a day-to-day basis. And I think when we start to look at the decisions that we make now and how they affect not only us and our legacy, but future legacies and future ways of being, I think it's really important to see, like, as we are in the pursuit of money, I don't know that we've gotten there yet, but I know that personally, you can accumulate all the money in the world, but you can't take it with you, right? And so my mom always used to tell me that the material things that you accumulate here on earth are not really what matters. What really sticks and what lasts forever is what you do for somebody else. And I think that's the consciousness that we can utilize technology to gain, right? And I think over time, what technology has allowed us to do was search for the spiritual aspects of our understanding, right? What is consciousness? Can we how do we program that into artificial intelligence when we don't even understand it ourselves, right? And you can't hard code that because it's ever changing. And my consciousness is related to someone else's consciousness, right?
Yeah.
So I think these ethical uses of how we look at data, how we look at bias, how we look at discrimination, how we look at transparency, and even accountability is going to be really critical, as we move forward with this song and dance with technology.
Jennifer, I'd love for you and Ramon to chime in on this too, because when I was researching for this episode, every single question, I was just playing around with ChatGPT. I was, going in and even like thinking about more existential questions I could ask you by using ChatGPT. And one of the things that kept continuously coming up in almost every answer that was given to me was about biases, unconscious biases, and it was almost like the technology was excusing itself for having biases, when in theory the one of the biggest things that's being that this technology is trying to accomplish is an unbiased approach, right? To give us what we need to be able to make the decisions, and then you go away because you're gonna bias it up yourself. And so from your standpoint, how can we, just speaking in the space of DEI, how can we use AI technology, use even this concept of decentralized communities? How can we really seek to have an unbiased approach in the work that we do with in anything with utilizing AI, if the actual technology itself was seeking to unbias itself when I was doing my research?
Well, I'll take a stab. I would say the number one thing is, you have to remember AI was not created to have a moral code. It does not have the human. I always say to people, the greatest thing it does not do is have ethics or the moral human element part of it, and instincts. It may have probabilities, which, like the large language models or any of the AI models, it only can choose from what it's been fed. I say, think of it as a brain. Like our software at Narrativa has a really, really complex knowledge graph. And I always compare it to a brain, and whatever you ingest into it and feed into that brain, that's what's going to be able to compute for you and deliver or have as an output and generate. So I would say the number one thing is use AI for tasks that don't have to have a moral decision or an ethical decision in place. That's why, obviously, like with clinical trials, I would say use it for computing all the data, right? That will then give the physician or give the regulators the opportunity to see all the statistics and all the analysis and make the right decision. So based on the facts, they can then make the moral or ethical decision of what needs to happen. So that's what I would say first. That's probably the biggest area.
That's helpful.
I would say that the most interesting aspect of it is this decentralization of information and of knowledge, right? Being able to have access to, I'll give an example because that's always more fun. One of my kids had a rash, and we were trying to figure out what is going on. So we called doctors, and basically we called, a nursing line. We spoke to them. We spoke to a virtual doctor, as we're all remote. And their recommendations were largely the same. We could wait and kind of document the foods and figure out what it could be, or whatever, all that. And we could come in and do a blood test or get whatever. Regardless, it was going to take a few days. So I just punched it into ChatGPT. I went through everything he had consumed, everything that had touched his skin, took snapshots, and was able to obviously utilize the AI to analyze the picture and put that into text form, and all the things that I think today sometimes take for granted that we couldn't do 10 years ago, right? I was able to do all of that in one quick 4 to 5 minute process tops. Put it in, basically gathering the data, putting that into the AI to analyze that data and tell us, boom, this is what it could be. And so we were able to cross-reference it, and it listed, these, potential peanuts and this and that. It ended up being a laundry detergent, one random chemical in a laundry detergent that I never would have caught because the laundry detergent itself was marketed as all natural,
Free and clear.
hypoallergenic, right? It's safe, right?
Right.
Safe to use, all this stuff. So we were able to actually stop using it, and we haven't seen that since. So, you being able to, I think, as an average everyday person or as a business owner, as an entrepreneur, I'll give one more example because it's been incredibly effective, is I was able to optimize my calendar and my schedule using AI, right? So I went into, GPT-4, and it was like, hey, this is all the stuff I need to get done. Here's my to-do list. Here are my, sort of rules, my daily routine things that I also want you to keep in mind, including brushing my teeth and taking a shower. This is what I need to fit into one day. Here's my schedule. I need to take a break to spend time with my kids on this day because I want to, right? Because that's the freedom that this sort of, remote lifestyle provides.
Yeah.
And it did that. And, of course, we're still working, and it's in progress, right? It sometimes will make mistakes. You just correct it, or you, like we've been saying, as a copywriter, as an editor, as a project manager, you're able to go in and tweak and modify, and you don't have to, pay 10 people to do a job that can get done in about 3 minutes. And all you have to do is make sure that you're overseeing it, double checking it, whether it's branding or language or whatever, messaging, whatever that piece of content is, right? That it's all about that use case, I think. And again, that's your decentralization of the access to the technology, the information, that I think is going to kind of push innovation and allow us to do things that, in our wildest dreams, we never thought possible. We're already starting to see it. Those of us who are in the space full time, I'm seeing things that are blowing my mind on the daily now, just in terms of capability of what AI is allowing humans to do, right?
Yeah. This is great. I'm gonna use that now instead of the other people that start with a G, I guess, to look up what is this thing. I want to touch just briefly on this. I know that we're running close to our time here, and I do want to get into the social responsibility quickly, but just to kind of touch on these ideas of DEI advances and any advocacy. So I grew up in the Silicon Valley. I actually went to Steve Jobs High School, and I was really there when all of the dot-commers were in school. We were all in high school and junior high together, and they were creating these things that we now use. And I mentioned in a previous episode that I was a part of the cool crowd, while these guys, and they mostly were guys. Well, they all were guys back then. They were considered the geeks, and they definitely have the last laugh now, being billionaires. But we'll move on. But this is what I was witnessing happening, and now to see, over 20 years later, what was being created is just like, oh, that's what y'all were doing. Okay, fascinating. But what I did notice, it very much was male heavy, white male heavy, as well as South Asian male heavy. I mean, that's what the Silicon Valley was, still is. But we have seen a lot of movement and advocacy done in the area of DEI efforts, not just with race and gender, but a slew of other things. Have you all been the recipients of the advantages that we have had, or not the advantages, but the progression that we have had? Or are you all, because you're in it, are you all still experiencing barriers to, we all represent, we have a woman, we have someone from the African-American community, Ramon, you're Latino. Have you all seen barriers or actual advantages in the area of DEI efforts?
I can speak on that, I guess. It's hard for me to say. I've experienced in my lifetime, I think, a mix of the two. I've met people along the way that, for whatever reason, didn't want to see me succeed. And I've also met people along the way who, had strong desire to see me succeed. But, I can't really pinpoint any specific sort of, opportunities or anything in particular that sort of, elevated things in a way that, were super life-changing. I think for me personally, it's definitely just been more of a consistent grind over the last 15 years, and people have come and gone, and mentors have come and gone, but I can't say I've specifically felt sort of the necessarily the support of the Latino community in particular. But that's not to say that there aren't people that are supportive. I also haven't actively been looking for like particular support just based on my ethnicity. I try whenever possible to let my merit speak for itself. And whether that lands or not, I really just leave it to the audience that's experiencing it, really, ultimately. So that's been my personal experience. So I like to kind of share that whenever possible.
Yeah, and I think for me, it's been both sides of the coin, right? For me, traveling, I think just basically my skin color and my ethnic background has allowed me into communities that may have not have been accessible to, different people. So that actually, gives me the opportunity to not only create value, but to gain value, right? And to have conversations with people, and not only conversations, but honest conversations, where a lot of the challenges that we face are built on trust, right? Am I going to tell you what my real problem is? Or I'm going to gives you an answer that I think you want just to extract, right? And I think that has allowed me to maybe maneuver in certain unique ways. But then also, if you are able to speak that terminology, what technology is starting to do is flatten the actual accessibility, right? Where if you have an ingenious idea, then you can monetize without the power structures necessarily being the traditional ones that could stop something from making that succeed. When we talk about blockchain and provenance and things of that nature, we have these tools that can actually protect IP. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for individuals and communities to leapfrog, right, what we've done. We have a bunch of data of how it was before, but we also have consideration of all of the failures, right, or the mistakes that were made. And now new communities are able to actually leapfrog and not build the same thing, but take it forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean,
I think
those
you
are
nailed
both.
it.
Yeah, that was a great way to say it.
Yeah.
I totally agree with Marques and Ramon. I think, 15, even 10 years ago, I felt definitely a larger barrier, even when I was working in media and in technology, being female, and then even many of my friends who are different ethnicities. Even my husband, who's a different ethnicity than I am, and so it at times I think it's been very difficult. But now I'm happy to say that now I have seen a shift, especially in the last year. Maybe it's just me, but even at like events, tech events, or even which pharmaceutical industry is even more behind, I would say, in the DEI sector, but they're kind of slowly coming up. I was happy that at several of the events I was at this year, there were whole main sessions entirely geared towards diversity and equality and inclusion. There were whole divisions of panelists and different speaking circuits that had all about diversity and inclusion. And I think it's great. I think now even VCs who I'm talking with on a regular basis and investors, they are looking for leaders. And I tell anyone who's going to hear this, if you have an idea or you're passionate about something, go for it. Because right now, I feel like the investment community is actually just hungry for diversity. And so I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in the next 10, 20 years. I think a lot of things are going to change for the good. Mm-hmm.
That's great. That's awesome. And I definitely want to get, and we'll probably save it for using as sound bites. But Jennifer, you had given me, when I was sort of kind of going over with you what this was going to be about, you had given me this great story of what happened to you when you had to speak before. I think it was an all male meeting, mm-hmm. maybe 20 or so people, and just what you brought as being a woman and bringing sort of, I think he used the word this nurturing question rather. And it got the crickets in the room. And not because there wasn't an ability for the men to understand this nurturing component, but it wasn't innate. It wasn't as at the forefront of their emotion, like it just naturally comes for most women. And how that, I think this whole thing of like shifting the atmosphere of a room can really inform how decisions are made. And that's important. That's important for business owners, entrepreneurs, artists, whatever industry you're in.
Absolutely. And every single one of us, we're all born with our own lens, and we can't change that. That's part of our DNA. That's part of who we are and how we were created. And so, yes, we can be more open, I think, and, not have as many biases, right? Because we want to be open to every person and giving them an opportunity, giving them the opportunity to share and be part of the conversation. That, of course, 100%. But we should never underestimate our own opinion and what we can contribute to the table. I mean, like Sonia said, I sit in meetings with all men pretty much on a daily basis, which I don't mind. I mean, I grew up with all brothers, all boy cousins, so I'm kind of used to it. But I sometimes at times I've really put myself down mentally and said, oh, maybe I don't have much to contribute here because they're all brilliant. They have PhDs or they're, like this and that, and they have these huge accolades. But then I say, no, I can look at it from the female perspective or from my background and the experiences I have and how I can bring that to the table. So I say every person has something to contribute, no matter if they are brand new in their career, they're at the end of their career, no matter what their gender or ethnicity, every person has something to contribute. And I even share a lot about that with young and old, because in the tech world, everyone's all about, ooh, I want the new young student right out of Stanford, or, who's the expert in Java or whatever. Honestly, that's great. And I don't want to look down upon the young, but I don't want to forget to respect the old. So the people who've been around the block many times, they have so much wisdom I can glean from. So I think we need to also think of age discrimination too, not just ethnicity or gender, but age discrimination is huge. So that's another thing I want to just bring to the forefronts of our minds. Like, I just put together a new advisory board for our life sciences product line, and the average age is 62 on this board, and they are brilliant. I mean, I sit there quiet the whole time because I'm just absorbing all this super valuable information from them. Yes. These are trailblazers. So I just say, make sure you're not, looking down upon the young, and don't disrespect the old. You need both. You need that balance to really have a healthy viewpoint.
So good. So good. Yeah. Absolutely. We're actually our final episode next week. We have a fun banter. It's called Battle of the Generations, and I've managed to procure, with the help of my team, shout out to the team, the State of Events team, I've managed to get someone from every generation. So we have a boomer, awesome, a Generation X, a millennial, and a Generation Z, all on a call together. It's open fun. You get to go at it with each other. To talk about these very things, because as you have just mentioned, Jennifer, our teams are so much more rich when there is someone represented from every walk of life, particularly those who cross generational lines. I think listening to the sages in the room is a lost art, quite frankly. Which actually leads to our final thought here, and it's about social responsibility. I know that, and I can imagine, Marques, you're so polished and you have so much tact, but I just can't help but remember when you were speaking to the room of parents. Almost our entire rest of the presentation was around us parents having these, and you as yourself probably, having these really big, as my son's school teaches, we had big emotions about social responsibility. And so what, for all of you for that matter, what is one of the biggest questions you get on social responsibility? Is it safety for kids, or is it, I'm going to be out of work? Like what, or anything in between? What are some of the biggest questions you get about social responsibility in the work that you do?
I think it's all of those, right? But I think one of the biggest things is ethical use of data, right? We're actually, in this world where we're kind of intertwined with data usage, data extraction, where people don't really understand where their data is going. Now you have like these voice augmentations, where people can actually take your voice and implant it on different things. You have deep fakes, and then ultimately, like if we get into a world like kind of further out in the timeline where we have these digital twins, right? Where there's this digital twin that's growing with you from when you're little to actually calculating all of the actions and proactions that you do within the world. And I think that data usage and who has access to that is really about identity. Like, even if we're not considering it, we're leaving a trail of data, a large swath of data. Our phones have like 13 to 15 sensors on them, right? Or we have cookies, we have all these different things that are tracking us that we don't really know where that data is utilizing. And there's one thought, there's also this kind of new thing called neuromining, where companies are using synthetic data. So they're taking a small batch of personal data, and then they're using algorithms to actually create batches of considered synthetic data that can be utilized to understanding human behavior or implanting ideas and thoughts. And so those are some of the biggest questions that I get from companies on how do we actually work with consumers and customers when it comes to data. But then also, I think what's in a close second is this bias, right, and discrimination. Who is actually creating these hardwares and softwares? If we only have 10 cis white males in the room while you're creating that, it might be a brilliant idea, but are you considering the intended and unintended consequences that go into developing something? Transparency goes with kind of the data, and then I think accountability. If something goes wrong with this data, who's responsible? Is it the machine? Is it the developer? Is it the company who employed that data? So I think all of these things dance together and they work together. But those are some of the top things that I'm hearing on a day-to-day basis when it comes to social responsibility.
Ramon, I'd love to hear how social responsibility comes up with you in the NFT, specifically in the NFT space, because I wonder because it's a manufactured image, I can imagine that it's just like, which one of these is the real one? How, authenticity is probably a big thing. So what are you seeing in the area of social responsibility?
Yeah, 100%. You nailed a big part of it. One of the interesting ironies about the whole thing is this idea of, the privacy behind having an avatar, right? That isn't an identifiable picture of you. And so a lot of people, got into the space and have utilized these, sort of social identities, right? These virtual identities essentially that they want to use across not just social media, but games. And a lot of times their gamer tag is the same as their social media tag. And we sort of had hints of this, early on with things like AIM and, MySpace and all these things, right? You pick a handle and you end up sometimes using it across multiple virtual, like Marcus is talking about, these footprints, right, that we leave virtually, digitally, that we have left over the years, right? And so some people, I think, over time are going to be taking control of these, but that's a conversation for another day. But that's a big part of it, right? Is who is keeping track of this information, but who is transparent and who can you trust, right? We're basically moving into a time period where transparency is really difficult to sort of enforce, right? Or to hold accountability for. We see it, I think, in Web 2, quote unquote, as we still call sort of the old world, or things as they have been traditionally for a long time. We know now through technology, interestingly enough, how corrupt these systems can be and how easily corruptible they are, right? And so I think one of the biggest things that we talk about in the NFT space is, integrity and authenticity, and who can you trust, and how do you trust the reputation of someone who is using a cartoon animal as their profile picture, right? And so that's a large part of the conversation that I try and push as much as possible, utilizing my voice on social media. It's mostly crypto Twitter right now, and that's been the case in the major platform for the last few years. But as time evolves, there's going to be different, platforms and communities. And so that's really, I think, the biggest point of conversation there. And I think that's where blockchain really excels, is it's truly a technology that's already allowing us to be able to keep track of different activities that could be, potentially criminal. But there's a fine line. There's a fine line between having your privacy and not just of your data, but your transactions, right? So that's really ultimately, I think, where the conversation is centering at this point in time. But that spills over just into these themes of decentralization as a whole, and sort of the moral responsibility and obligation that comes with having self-sovereignty and being responsible for your own wallet and all these different things, right? They're all kind of intertwined, I think, to some degree.
Wow.
Yeah, I think they both summed it up pretty good.
No problem.
I mean, the biggest thing I always say, I tell my 9-year-old son, listen to your gut. Listen to your gut. If something seems fishy, I mean, I think we're born with that intuition. Again, that's not what AI has. So, I mean, that cannot be replicated. So listen to your gut. It's always better to not give as much information than give too much. So I would just say, to my son and the younger generations, just be careful. Don't give away too much. I have a lot of interns who I bring in, and I hate to say it, I Google them. I go online and I see, whoa, what they're doing on social media, or even people when I'm hiring people. When I do a lot of hires, and I have to do some fires sometimes. And when I go online, I don't want that to be part of my decision making, but I hate to say it does. Sometimes it does weigh in as a factor. So I tell the younger generations, be careful. What you're putting out there, it can follow you. And you don't want it to follow you to a job interview or, anywhere. So, I just think we need to be more mindful of that. Even as adults, I have to be more mindful all the time what I'm putting out there. So it's interesting.
Especially in a time where it's we feel compelled to put more information out there than we ought, because we're in an information era. And so it's like, let me tell you exactly what I did this weekend, where I was, and who was there. It's like, nah, I don't know that you need to do all of that. So this is 100%. Good. This is good. Yeah. A lasting question I would love for you to all give our listeners is, what is the one single piece of advice that you have learned working as an entrepreneur or business person in tech that you want to leave our listeners today?
It's a good question. I think for me, I'll kick it off, I suppose, with that. Okay. No, I think that the biggest thing is not to be discouraged, right? It's very easy, coming from. Now, again, I did have an advantage, growing up with computers, but technology is growing at such a rapid rate, right, that there's no possible way any single human being can keep up with all of the innovation. So I think it's really just about contextually finding out which problems you have as an entrepreneur, right, that this technology can solve, and then not being discouraged as you're learning, because it can be overwhelming. It can feel like a foreign language. It can feel like, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There's a lot of scammers, particularly in this space, because it's not regulated. But there's a lot of good here, and there's a lot of tools that I know are already changing lives significantly, not just monetarily, but in a lot of the ways that we talked about just in daily life. It's powerful stuff. So don't be discouraged as you learn, and try and find, those voices that are going to guide you along the way and answer questions, whether it's through podcasts or whatever other content you can consume to educate yourself.
It's great. Great. Thank you.
Yeah, for me, I think the biggest piece of advice, and I think it goes back to that generational aspect, is find a mentor, right? Find someone who has been there before. They may not have done it exactly where you want to do, but they have knowledge. And I think that knowledge kind of bleeds into this commitment to continuous learning and adaptation, right? And always be willing to improve yourself and never really kind of get to a point where you think you know everything, even if you're making $1 billion, because things change rapidly. We are in the era of change. And I think, if we stay ahead and we continue to learn and we continue to adapt and we are mindful of the experiences that we're creating for ourselves and other people, I think we'll be fine. But I think, find a mentor, always be committed to continuously to learn and adapt to the changing times. And I think as an entrepreneur, you'll be okay.
It's great. It's great. Any field, right? If you're an entrepreneur, not any field that you're in, you need to have a mentor. It's so good.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah, I would just add to those. I think those were great. Just always think of yourself as a student. Don't ever think of yourself as an expert, because there's always someone smarter. So, and don't be afraid to try new things. That's definitely the theme of my life. So don't be afraid to try new things. You may be surprised how great it can be.
So good. Jennifer, on that note, can you please tell our listeners how they can keeping involved with what you're doing? What are you up to next? How can they find you?
They can definitely find me on LinkedIn. So I'm always posting new things on LinkedIn, places I'm speaking, or new updates about our new products. So you can find me linkedin.com/Jennifer Bittinger. And then you can also go to our Narrativa website. It's just NARRATIVA.com. So we'd love to be connected.
Thanks. And Marques, how can we find out about what you got going on?
Yeah, indeed. Same, LinkedIn / Marques Anderson. But you could also go to marquesanderson.com and find out more some of the things that we're working on. The venture studio that will be standing up in the next month or two will be called Odyssey Foundation. So we'll have some really interesting and immersive experiences that are coming through that portal. So, yeah.
And I think the best way to find out what we're up to is probably on our website, mythdivision.com. You can find me personally on probably most active on Twitter, just because it's kind of like really quick, tidbits. I'm often in and out. Social media can be pretty time consuming. And then there's also the Myth Division Twitter, which is just twitter.com/mythdivision. So those are them. Oh, my Twitter would be @Ramon Govea. It's just my name there.
Thank you all so much. This has been such an educating conversation, and I definitely am feeling empowered. I hope you as listeners have been empowered, even if to know how much more efficient you can be by implementing one component of this new tech, as I like to say. It's very new feeling. But implement something today, and I promise you, your life will feel a little, especially if we got a lot of mommypreneurs that follow us. You're killing it out there in the mommypreneur game. And so implementing just one of the things that you've heard today is really going to free you up and just allow you to be more involved in other things that you find important outside of your work. So thank you so much to our guests today. Thank you for making time for us. This has been the State of Events, and our episode today has been the future of business. See you all soon.